Did Trump act lawfully?
Right. And where's Congress?
Trump says, oh, we can't consult Congress because they leak.
Ugh.
What? You're going to tear up the Constitution because you think they're going to be leaks from the Congress. Think of the enormity of that kind of assertion, that kind of grasping of unchecked presidential power. Basically, remember, this is the guy who said, I can do anything I want as president. And this is another example of Trump doing anything I want. Did he get a declaration of war from Congress?
No.
Did he even get an authorization under the War Powers Act from Congress? Nothing. And they also claim that they could do this because it really wasn't an act of war. It was a special operation. What does that sound like, Sam?
Gobbledygook.
No, it sounds like what Russia used to justify the intervention in Ukraine. We're not really engaged in a war with Ukraine.
Interesting.
We're engaged in a special operation because the government of Ukraine is Nazified and corrupt.
Gotcha.
Exactly the same justification that Trump is using here. Moreover, this was not a surgical extraction. They launched bombing attacks not only in Caracas, where Maduro was, but on 3 other locations. How can you justify bombing around the country if all you're doing is a surgical, Navy SEAL or whoever, special forces extraction of Maduro? He never explained why there was such widespread bombing and not just a surgical extraction of Maduro. Moreover, an American indictment does not mean that the United States can invade a foreign country to extract someone who's under indictment in the United States. There are procedures for that. Of course, you couldn't have used them in Venezuela, but that does not, and I'm not a lawyer, but in my view, that does not provide legal justification for invading a foreign country, a sovereign country, a UN member, in order to extract someone who is under indictment in the U.S. I'm sure there are lots of people in foreign countries under indictment in the U.S. And, he just piled on lies upon lies. Claiming Maduro has sent all these bloodthirsty gang members who are killing Americans, emptied out his insane asylums, sent all these dangerous persons to the United States. Is there any evidence for that, Sam? None. Not a bit. That's just something he made up. In fact, it's just the opposite. Maduro has agreed to take in gang members deported from the United States. Moreover, as we've said so many times, this idea that these migrants to the United States are these bloodthirsty, dangerous killers is another fabrication. Study after study, including one from the Cato Institute, not a left-wing organization, a libertarian group, the National Institute of Justice, have proven that undocumented immigrants and immigrants in general commit crimes, including violent crimes, at a much lower rate than native-born Americans. So, he's created this great fear of the other, these migrants, these people who are killing us, committing crimes. And it's just not true. It is another myth. It also may not be true that this so-called, I forget the name of it, the Solar cartel even exists, that Trump claims Maduro is the head of.
Which one? Tren de Aragua?
No, there was another one that he claims Maduro is actually running. I don't recall the exact name of it. But it's not even clear that it even exists. And then other lies. There have been no murders in the last 6 months because of National Guard troops. That was fact-checked by the Washington Post. Over 60 murders, 60 homicides during that period. one of the loved ones of one of the victims came out and said, how can you, say that? How can you trivialize the murder of someone I love? It's just outrageous.
How do you balance this idea that, Maduro is this bad guy? He's an illegitimate president. The people of Venezuela want him out. A lot of the expats who live in the United States want him out, right? He's not just going to walk away. How do you balance that between, this continued sort of fool's errand that the U.S. does of military operations and regime change? Is there any middle ground here?
There is a middle ground, and that's pressure and diplomacy. They were putting a lot of pressure on Maduro, and there was some indication that they were making some progress diplomatically, that they were going to get concessions from the Maduro government. Of course, they wouldn't get the oil. They weren't going to give up the oil, which is their sovereign, wealth. But there was real indication that Maduro was willing, for example, to take action on the export of drugs. And that is the middle ground that we thought the Trump administration would follow, because of saying, I'm not going to start any more wars. I'm not going to do what, Democrats or George W. Bush have done in pursuing these feckless foreign adventures. And we know. Forced regime change in Iraq, in Iran, when they booted out Mossadegh and got the Shah and, got decades of repression. In Chile, where they got Pinochet. In Guatemala, where they totally disrupted the nation, leading to civil war and genocide against the Mayan people. In Libya, where they got rid of Gaddafi, but created again, totally disrupted, failed state. There isn't a good precedent for doing it. And Trump was actually right when he's saying, we don't want to engage in these kinds of foreign
Right, that's what I was saying. He was hitting, he was resonating with a lot of Americans when he was talking about this. Now, there's a Cuban person in the chat called Alex GMSD. They say that they're Cuban. They say, free my people in Cuba. Diplomacy doesn't work. Now, Cuba might be an example of, you can say you're doing diplomacy. I mean, there's been sanctions and soft pressure on Cuba for 80 years now, and there's still been no real change in Cuba.
And we tried regime change in Cuba. Have you forgotten, my friend, the Bay of Pigs, when we did launch this exile invasion of Cuba? And what was the result, Sam? You don't remember, but did you read about it?
Yeah, it failed.
It not only did it fail, people were killed, captured, and it strengthened the Castro regime. And that's one of the reasons why Castro and his successors have been able to clamp this kind of dictatorship on Cuba. You're not going to solve it by an invasion of Cuba.
Yeah. No, I mean, look, just to be clear, I am not defending regime change or military operations. I totally agree. They almost never work. They create power vacuums. They create decades-long problems. But I also do wonder, this idea of just just diplomacy. I think you can also find a lot of examples of that doesn't really work either. So
Absolutely.
That's where I get sort of tripped up, is you've got these terrible actors, you've got these people suffering. What's the solution?
Maybe there isn't one.
Yeah.
United States doesn't control the world.
Right.
And it's not as if we can, work our will on all these foreign nations. And Maduro was by far not the worst.
Right.
The worst is probably Trump's buddy, the one he said he had a love relationship with. Who am I talking about?
Kim Jong-un.
Kim Jong-un is probably the worst, certainly arguably the worst dictator. And, Trump fawns on him. Worse also is Vladimir Putin. And what did Trump do when Vladimir Putin came to visit?
Gave him the red carpet.
Rolled out the red carpet. So this notion, oh, I'm standing firm against these bad people is utter nonsense.
No, I agree. Look, I don't know. Sometimes I get frustrated because it feels like we just sit here and, go on and on about Trump lied about this and he's a hypocrite about that and he contradicted himself here. And it's like we've been doing that for 10 years and it doesn't seem to make any difference in the hearts and minds of Americans. And yeah, I agree. We have to speak out. But at a certain point, just sitting here being like, Trump's a hypocrite here and here and here and here. It's just kind of like, I don't know how
I think
useful
we're
that
making a
is.
dent.
You think so?
I do. Trump's approval ratings are the lowest of any president at this point in his term. Democrats have done amazingly well in the 2025 elections across the board, way exceeding expectations. Even some MAGA begin to crack a little bit, not much. So I get your frustration and I feel it, but I think we are making some progress. Most concretely, forget the polls, most concretely by the actual results of elections. Democrats across the board have triumphed in 2025.
Yeah, I agree. But I also feel like you could probably have said the exact same thing in 2018. You could have said, Trump's approval rating is really
But
low.
he lost in 2020.
Right, but then he won again. That's my point.
I get that, but it's not as if it had no effect.
Right, I see what you're saying.
Yeah. Thanks for watching our video. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and become a member today.